Hello and welcome. Today we are diving into a true giant of history, France. Think about it, from ancient Celtic tribes in a land called Gaul, all the way to a modern nuclear power that's right at the heart of Europe. The story of France is just this incredible, dramatic saga of conquest, revolution, and constant reinvention. It's really a story of how a nation was forged, completely shattered, and then somehow reborn over and over again.
So, to make sense of this epic story, we've broken it down into 5 acts. First, we'll start at the very beginning with its ancient origins in Gaul. Then we'll get into the really explosive stuff: absolutism, revolution, and empire. After that, we'll look at a wild century of change, followed by the harrowing trial by fire of the World Wars. And finally, we'll see the birth of the modern France we know today.
All right, let's kick things off with Act 1, From Gaul to Kingdom. This is all about how the very foundations of this nation were laid, piece by piece.
So long before anyone ever said the word France, this whole area was known as Gaul. It was home to a bunch of Celtic tribes until, you guessed it, Julius Caesar and his Roman legions showed up and conquered it. But this wasn't just some takeover. It actually created this new, vibrant Gallo-Roman culture that lasted for centuries. Of course, empires don't last forever. As Rome got weaker, all these migrating tribes started sweeping across the region, creating a huge power vacuum and basically setting the stage for a completely new order.
And this is where the pieces of what we now call France really start to fall into place. Out of all that chaos, a Germanic group called the Franks rose to the top. You start to see these key figures stitching the region together. In 486, a king named Clovis I unites a big chunk of Gaul. A few centuries later, you get the legendary Charlemagne, who builds this massive European empire. Now, after his empire eventually fractured, the western part, they called it West Francia, that became the kernel of France. And then, the big one, in 987, Hugh Capet is crowned king. He founds a dynasty that would rule for over 800 years and truly establish the Kingdom of France.
Okay, now we are entering a period of just dramatic extremes. Act 2. Absolutism, revolution, and empire. This is an era where the French nation gets pushed to its absolute breaking point, shattered, and then violently rebuilt into something completely new.
And really, this whole era is pretty much defined by one man, Louis XIV, the Sun King. This guy perfected the idea of absolute monarchy. He was a master strategist, weakening the nobility and centralizing all the power around himself in the incredible, lavish palace of Versailles. Under his rule, the king wasn't just the leader, he was literally the sun, and all of French power, culture, and life revolved around him.
His entire philosophy can be summed up in one famous and maybe a little arrogant phrase: "L'État, c'est moi," the state, it is I. And that was the absolute core belief of the Ancien Régime, or the Old Regime. The king and the state, they were one and the same. The whole system was built on divine right and total authority.
But a system built on that much inequality, it just can't last forever. In 1789, the French Revolution exploded, and that whole old order was just violently swept away. And the contrast was just absolute. Centuries of feudal privilege for the nobility and the clergy were abolished like overnight. The king's divine right was replaced by a republic founded on this totally radical new idea of the rights of the citizen. This wasn't just a change in government, it felt like the entire world was being turned upside down.
And out of that revolutionary chaos rose one of history's most incredible figures, Napoleon Bonaparte. He seized power, eventually crowned himself emperor, and here's the irony: he was a dictator who ended up cementing many of the revolution's best ideas. His most enduring legacy, the Napoleonic Code, it established principles like equality before the law and civil liberty. It created a blueprint for modern legal systems that spread across the entire globe.
All right, on to our third act, a century of change. After Napoleon's final defeat, France enters this period of just profound instability at home, even as it's trying to pursue this ambitious expansion abroad. It's a real paradox. The 100 years or so after Napoleon, wow, it was a political whirlwind. France just could not decide what it wanted to be. It lurched from a restored monarchy, back to a republic, then to a second empire under Napoleon's own nephew, before finally settling into the more stable Third Republic in 1870. It was just this dizzying, chaotic search for identity, fought through coups and revolutions. But here's the crazy part. While the political situation in Paris was an absolute mess, France was busy projecting its power all across the globe. This period saw the creation of a massive second colonial empire,
mostly in Africa and Indochina. This whole expansion was fueled by a mix of things: national prestige, a hunger for resources, and this belief in a civilizing mission, an idea that they were spreading French culture and values to the world.
Which brings us to our fourth and, well, probably its most painful act, trial by fire. The 20th century would test the French nation like never before, through two absolutely devastating world wars and the traumatic end of its empire.
It is really hard to wrap your head around the sheer scale of devastation in World War I. Just look at that number, 3.4 million. That's the number of French dead, soldiers and civilians. So much of the war on the Western Front was fought right there, on French soil, leaving the land itself scarred, and an entire generation of its people deeply traumatized.
And then, just 2 decades later, disaster struck all over again. Expecting another brutal trench war, France had built the mighty Maginot Line, this incredible series of fortifications. The problem was, they were preparing to fight the last war. Nazi Germany unleashed a whole new kind of warfare, the Blitzkrieg, or Lightning War, using coordinated planes and tanks to just go around the fortifications. The result was a stunningly fast, deeply humiliating defeat in just 6 weeks. And just like that, the Third Republic was gone.
This defeat literally tore the nation in two. In the south, you had the collaborationist Vichy regime, led by a World War I hero, Philippe Pétain, who chose to work with the Nazis. At the same time, from exile in London, General Charles de Gaulle was leading the Free French, organizing a fierce resistance against the occupation. It was an incredibly dark time of internal conflict, basically a French civil war fought in the shadows. And the trials still weren't over. After the war, France fought these brutal and ultimately hopeless wars to try and cling to its colonies, especially in Indochina and later Algeria. These conflicts didn't just drain the nation's money and manpower, they fractured its soul and marked the final, painful end of that French imperial dream.
And all of that brings us to our final act, Modern France and Beyond. This is a story of incredible rebirth and reinvention, literally rising from the ashes of war. The crisis in Algeria was so severe that it brought Charles de Gaulle back to power in 1958. He drafted a whole new constitution, establishing the Fifth Republic, the strong, stable system that governs France to this day. His vision was crystal clear: create a powerful presidency to end all the political chaos, secure France's independence with its own nuclear deterrent, and reposition the nation as a leader at the very heart of a new, uniting Europe. And this vision of European leadership became a new cornerstone of French identity. As a founding member of what would eventually become the European Union, France totally shifted its focus. After centuries of conflict with its neighbors, especially Germany, it pivoted to a new era of economic and political partnership. It was a really remarkable move from empire to union.
So, this brings us to the big question for France today. After all those centuries spent forging this powerful, distinct national identity, through monarchy, revolution, empire, and war, France now finds itself as a key player in a united Europe and a deeply globalized world. So we're left with this really fascinating question to think about. How will this incredibly proud and historic nation continue to evolve? And what does it really mean to be French in the 21st century?